Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. Lena Smirnova had witnessed so many diplomatic disasters that she unmistakably recognized the warning signs. The tension in the Meridian Outpost Command Center was palpable, like the moments before the plasma cable exploded. She stood on the observation deck, watching as the last in a long line of optimistic human negotiators confronted Commander Vexera of the Ethereal Alliance, whose elongated ears seemed to twitch with barely suppressed irritation every time the man opened his mouth. "Let's be clear," Vexera said, her melodious voice carrying the kind of patience that precedes either enlightenment or execution. "Do you expect us to believe that everything will be different this time? That people have suddenly discovered the concept of honor after centuries of broken promises and broken contracts?" Kayla Martinez, the person in question, leaned forward across the holographic conference table with a sincere seriousness that made her words more convincing. Lena Smirnova was torn between the desire to applaud and hide behind her coffee dispenser. Martinez arrived 3 days ago with credentials from the diplomatic corps and the alarming confidence of a man who genuinely believes he can blurt his way out of an interstellar conflict. "I'm not asking you to believe in the collective honor of humanity," he said, and his words carried such a force of conviction that they contained either profound wisdom or breathtaking delusion. "I ask you to believe in me. I am ready to risk everything for the success of these negotiations." Lena snorted softly into her synthetic coffee, a drink that tasted like optimism passed through the bitterness of disappointment. "To everyone, he says," she thought. "It's easy to promise everything when you've never seen what it looks like with plasma burns and alien autopsy protocols." On the quantum display in the command center, tactical information colored the walls, telling a story Lena preferred not to think about. The ethereal forces of the Alliance were carefully hidden along the Outer Rim territories. Their bioships, which were not built, but grown, emitted organic energy signatures that made people's sensors twitch with alarm. The Meridian Outpost served as humanity's foremost diplomatic position, a shining symbol of their commitment to a peaceful settlement. Yet he was also armed with enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. "Your individual honor," Vexera repeated, rising from her seat with a smooth grace that reminded Lena of predators assessing the value of their prey. "Forgive my skepticism, Negotiator Martinez, but people's individual promises have historically been as reliable as solar flares during the navigation season." Kayla's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. "Then test me. Give me a chance to prove that some people understand the difference between words and obligations." "Oh, great," Lena muttered, checking her equipment. Surveillance footage showed alien and human soldiers maintaining a respectful distance, their fingers hovering over weapons capable of turning the base into its component parts. Diplomatic situations are never a good place to start, she thought. He would then offer to engage in single combat or perform a live antimatter juggling act as a gesture of goodwill. Vexera's ears, those characteristic elongated appendages that accentuated her ethereal beauty, tilted forward in such a way that Lena learned to interpret it as a sign of potential danger. Vexera had been at Meridian Outpost for 18 months, long enough for Lena to realize that her moments of curiosity often preceded a day of trouble. Vexera seemed surprised as she walked around the holographic display, her footsteps making the air shimmer. "This is an intriguing proposal, but what kind of test could decades of accumulated distrust overcome? I'm ready to pass it." "I'll do whatever you ask," Kayla said, his gaze fixed on Vexera's face. "If proving my dedication to the world requires personal sacrifice, then I'm ready to do it." Lena felt her stomach drop. It was a feeling that she began to associate with moments when the universe decided to become unnecessarily complicated. She had seen enough military disasters to recognize the very moment when reasonable people started making unwise decisions, usually right before everything went awry. "A personal sacrifice," Vexera said. "I'm ready to do it." You talk about sacrifice as if you understand its true nature, she said. I understand that the peace between our species is worth more than my comfort, my safety, or my life, Kayla replied, his words falling into the recycled air of the command center like stones thrown into still water. If that's what it takes to prevent this war, then I'm willing to pay the price. After 5 days of negotiations, Lena took enough synthetic stimulants to try them on herself. She also developed the nervous habit of checking her weapon every 17 minutes. The command center was a place of diplomatic tension, where every conversation carried the weight of potential genocide. Kayla's passionate speeches about cooperation between humans and ethers began to affect even Vexera, who carefully maintained her emotional barriers. Kayla explained that joint technological initiatives will revolutionize both our civilizations. He gestured towards holographic displays showing proposed fusion reactors that combined human engineering with ethereal bioneural interfaces. Vexera leaned back in her chair, her pointed ears twitching, a gesture Lena had learned to interpret as either intense concentration or barely contained murderous impulses. Your proposals suggest a level of trust that has never existed between our species. Negotiator Martinez, you are talking about sharing technologies that can be turned into weapons, revealing our most closely guarded secrets to beings who have historically used any advantage for conquest. Because we've never had a reason to trust each other, Kayla countered, and his voice carried such fervent conviction that Lena wanted to either nominate him for sainthood or schedule a psychiatric evaluation. Every encounter between humans and the airwaves was caused by fear. The notion that collaboration implies vulnerability. Lena watched the quantum communication channels, noting a surge in activity from both human and extraterrestrial command structures. The fleet's movements suggested that military leaders on both sides were preparing for the failure of negotiations, positioning their forces for a conflict that could make the issue of trust irrelevant. To approach it in a different way, Vexera repeated, her voice carrying those disturbing harmonies that seemed to bypass human hearing and resonate directly in the nervous system. You make it so easy, as if centuries of war can be solved with optimistic thinking and good intentions. Not easy, Kayla said, approaching the negotiating table with such determined energy that Lena thought of homing missiles aiming at their targets. It's difficult, dangerous, and requires sacrifices on both sides, but it's possible if we're willing to take the risk. Vexera's eyes widened slightly, and Lena noticed how she seemed to struggle with the concepts Kayla was discussing. Vexera noticed. You talk about the victim with surprising frequency. She stood up and began to circle slowly, which seemed to be the equivalent of pacing for her kind. Tell me, Negotiator Martinez, she said, what exactly are you willing to sacrifice for this hypothetical opportunity? Kayla answered without hesitation. Everyone. My career, my safety, my life. If necessary. His answer was uttered with such conviction that Lena's instincts began to write letters of resignation. Harmony between our species is more important than the life of any individual. Amazing, Lena whispered, updating her personal journal with observations about the connection between diplomatic ideals and the statistical probability of needing emergency medical care. In the next moment, he will volunteer for an innovative surgical procedure or offer to test the compatibility of alien atmospheres with his own respiratory system. The holographic displays changed to display recent intelligence reports on border skirmishes, where nervous patrol teams mistakenly shot at shadows and misinterpreted sensor readings. Each skirmish brought our species closer to a full-scale conflict that would have made the wars of the past centuries seem like minor disagreements over the allocation of resources. Vexera said, your willingness to sacrifice your life for the sake of peace is admirable. There was a hint of sarcasm in her tone, suggesting that she was testing the limits of human sincerity. But death is, Martinez negotiates, facing the consequences of our decisions, remaining steadfast even as enthusiasm fades and reality turns out to be more complex than ideology. It takes a different kind of courage. Kayla stopped, his expression turning into a mix of determination and something Lena could only describe as dangerously calm. Then, Commander, test my courage. Let me demonstrate that my commitment goes beyond mere words and good intentions. The quantum communication system issued a series of urgent signals, with priority messages coming from fleet commanders, colonial governors, and military leaders who were losing patience with the diplomatic efforts. Lena glanced at the tactical displays, noting the location of the forces that could turn the Meridian Outpost sector into a wreckage zone within a few hours if negotiations failed. Vexera amused herself by challenging his courage, getting close enough to the situation to. Lena saw that both creatures seemed to be in a state of tension that excluded everything else in the control room. It's an intriguing idea, but what kind of test could satisfy your apparent desire to turn abstract concepts into tangible actions? A moment when carefully planned diplomatic protocols gave way to individual decisions that would have far-reaching consequences for all the civilizations involved. Lena, an experienced crisis management expert, began calculating evacuation procedures, knowing from experience that when idealistic volunteers participate in unspecified trials involving alien concepts of bravery, emergency transportation is most likely required. At 0347 o'clock, an emergency meeting began, which, as Lena knew from experience, was the perfect time to make catastrophic decisions under pressure. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos, which often preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or military disasters. Holographic displays projected tactical information onto the walls, indicating that both the human and alien fleets were about 6 hours away from turning diplomatic negotiations into military action. The Ethereal High Command has issued an ultimatum, Vexera announced. Lena learned to recognize the position of her outstretched ears, which were pressed against her skull, as a sign of either extreme stress or preparation for violence. They require concrete evidence of people's commitment to peace. Otherwise, they will authorize preemptive strikes against your outer colonies during the next solar cycle. Kayla stands in the center of the storm, keeping calm, which Lena compares to the eye of a hurricane, a metaphor for the calm before the storm. What proof could satisfy them? That's where things get intriguing, in the traditional Chinese sense of the word. Lena interjects, pulling files from the xenological database of the outpost. Apparently, the Ethereal Alliance has a unique cultural practice known as the Flaming Determination Test, which involves demonstrating dedication by walking on fire. Through a field of plasma fire that can transform organic matter into its constituent molecules. Vexera's expression became a mixture of embarrassment and what could have been growing horror. This test was an ancient ritual that no non-etheric species had ever attempted, and the physiological demands alone were incredibly high. Kayla said with such concentrated intensity that Lena wanted to hide behind the explosion-proof furniture. Your superiors want me to prove my human commitment by passing a test that could kill me. The test probably won't kill you, Lena corrected, opening more detailed files that made her stomach perform acrobatic tricks. According to these specifications, the plasma field operates at temperatures that will vaporize human tissue in about 37 seconds, and it is only through specialized bioneuronal adaptations that ethereal beings survive in it. The test site is located in the ceremonial area of the outpost, Vexera explained, her tone indicating a growing awareness of the seriousness of the task she was assigned. This is a crystal chamber surrounded by plasma field generators that create an energy barrier approximately 50 meters long. Participants must cross this field without protective gear to demonstrate their unwavering dedication to their cause. Kayla nodded, as if she were describing the weather rather than the ordeal. The test arena was a magnificent structure of biodegraded crystal and energy management systems, designed by beings who viewed physics as a proposition rather than a law. Plasma field generators surrounded the central path, emitting light that made human eyes, water, and nervous systems uncomfortable. However, I have to admit that I was wrong. You've proved me wrong. I have to do this, Kayla said, and his voice carried such finality that Lena thought of wills and last wishes. If I refuse, both our species will start a war. If I die trying, at least it proves that some people are capable of making a real sacrifice for the sake of peace. Vexura's ears twitched quickly. It was a nervous behavior Lena had never seen before. Martinez, negotiator, you must understand that when I proposed this test, I never intended it to be a real test. The High Command chose this test because they believed that no one would be stupid enough to try to pass it. However, I have to admit I was wrong. You've proved me wrong. Then they're about to discover something fascinating about human recklessness, Kayla replied, his demeanor turning into a kind of resolute calmness that historically preceded humans engaging in activities that defied numerous laws of physics and common sense. Lena checked the chronometer readings, noting the countdown timers that measured the fleet's approach vectors, and the deadline for the ultimatum in units that suggested that the universe had a perverted sense of time. According to the ceremonial procedures, the trial should begin at dawn to ensure proper alignment with the local stellar radiation. This gives us about 4 hours to prepare for what, according to statistics, will be a very brief and instructive lesson in the physics of human combustion. Garange, there was a silence in the command center that preceded either enlightenment or disaster. 3 creatures of 2 different species pondered the consequences of their actions. The possibility of interstellar peace depended on one person's decision to face a situation that could turn them into atoms before they took the 3rd step. The sky was tinted with copper hues, which was a poignant reminder of the potential consequences. The arena was buzzing with anticipation, the air heavy with the smell of ozone and impending doom. Lena stood on the observation deck, surrounded by a crowd of people and military personnel, all gathered to witness what would be either a historic diplomatic triumph or an exciting failure, depending on how long Kayla could withstand the pressure before undergoing a spontaneous molecular reorganization. The arena in front of them was like a crystal cathedral, designed by beings whose aesthetic senses included potential lethality as a fundamental design principle. The ceremonial path was lined with plasma field generators, their biocorrupted surfaces pulsing with pent-up energy. This changed the local space-time, which caused error messages to appear on Lena's tactical displays every 30 seconds. Lena addressed the audience through a communication system, saying, "We are about to witness either the most courageous act of diplomacy in recorded history, or the most instructive plasma physics lesson ever conducted with a volunteer. I honestly can't decide which outcome scares me more." Vexura stood at the edge of the arena, her long ears quivering from what Lena now recognized as barely contained emotional distress. The normally restrained manner of the alien commander collapsed overnight, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic mixed with deep regret. "Negotiator Martinez," she said, and her voice carried a melody that seemed designed to bypass the human ear and resonate directly into the soul. "You must. I understand that this experiment was not intended to be attempted. It was chosen precisely because no human could have survived in it." Kayla approached the entrance to the arena with a firm gait, having spent the early morning hours removing all protective gear in accordance with the test protocol. His bare feet made no sound on the crystallized surface, and his facial expression conveyed a sense of resolute calm that reminded Lena of religious martyrs and people whose devotion to abstract principles exceeded their desire to continue existing. "I understand," he replied, stopping at the threshold where the normal atmosphere meets the edge of the plasma field. "But sometimes the only way forward is through the impossible." "Oh, great," Lena murmured to her silent group. "He's quoting philosophy to an energy field that's going to spray him into floating atoms. It's definitely not going to end well for any of the participants." The plasma field, activated by a sound like reality tearing apart at poorly designed seams, created a barrier of coherent energy that shimmered with a light that was painful to look at. Lena's instruments recorded temperatures that would incinerate most known materials, radiation levels that were contrary to the laws of safe exposure, and energy densities that made her want to file formal complaints with those responsible for designing tests that included self-immolation as a standard procedure. Vexera, her voice trembling with something like despair, said, "There must be another way to prove it." He stepped into the fire, and the plasma field enveloped him like a living being, energy cascading down his skin in patterns that would turn him into subatomic particles in a matter of seconds. Nevertheless, he kept walking, each step deliberate and unwavering, despite the obvious agony written on his face. Lena watched through sensors that tracked biological functions, which she preferred not to dwell on, noting the increased heart rate, which indicated that his body was performing feats of endurance, contrary to medical textbooks. "How is he still moving?" she muttered, her voice barely audible over the constant roar of the plasma field. "According to all the calculations I've done, it should have gone through complete molecular disintegration about 47 seconds ago." Vexera's eyes widened with an emotion that went beyond mere amazement, entering an area that could be tinged with horror. "The trial responds to unwavering commitment," she said. Her words carried the weight of ancient wisdom, suggesting that she was witnessing something unprecedented in the annals of the ethereals. Those who enter with unwavering dedication find strength beyond physical limitations. Kayla reached the halfway point. His gait remained firm, his expression unchanged, as if he was possessed by a terrible, calm determination. Even as Lena's medical monitors registered the physiological stress that was supposed to cause immediate loss of consciousness and death, she continued to speak to the assembled observers, her voice rising as stress hormones engaged in creative chemical experiments with her nervous system. "He crosses a path that could feed a small town, and he does it barefoot, as if he's strolling through a particularly warm garden. I am torn between nominating him for the highest diplomatic awards and having him examined by xenopsychology experts." The crowd of military personnel fell silent, and both humans and ethereal beings watched with a kind of awe reserved for witnessing something extraordinary. The extraordinary has become common. Some of the celestial observers started behaving in a way Lena hadn't expected. Their pointed ears were pressed against their heads, and their eyes followed Kayla's movements with a look that suggested they were witnessing a systematic transformation of their fundamental beliefs about the world. As Kayla neared the end of the ordeal, Vexera,